Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got another great show for you today. Lots of exciting news to get to. Take it away, Jess.
Yes, Republicans are trying out a new attack line on Kamala Harris's running mate, Governor Tim Walz, accusing him of stolen valor. Here's Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance, talking about what really bothers him about Walz. Let's watch.
When the United States Marine Corps, when the United States of America asked me to go to Iraq to serve my country, I did it. I did what they asked me to do it, and I did it honorably, and I'm very proud of that service. When Tim Walz was asked by his country to go to Iraq, you know what he did? He dropped out of the Army and allowed his unit to go without him, a fact that he's been criticized for aggressively by a lot of the people that he served with. I think it's shameful to prepare your unit to go to Iraq, to make a promise that you're going to follow through, and then to drop out right before you actually have to go. I also think it's dishonest. Something, again, if you guys ever get an opportunity to ask Tim Walz or Kamala Harris some questions, he made this interesting comment that the Kamala Harris campaign put out there, and I bet they're regretting they put it out there now, because he said that and he was making a point about gun control, he said we shouldn't allow weapons that I used in war to be on America's streets. Well, I wonder, Tim Walz, when were you ever in war? What was this weapon that you carried into war, given that you abandoned your unit right before they went to Iraq, and he has not spent a day in a combat zone? What bothers me about Tim Walz is the stolen valor garbage. Do not pretend to be something that you're not.
That's one of the most serious allegations we've seen in this campaign. It's against federal law to lie about military service to try to defraud people. For context, Walz retired from the National Guard after 24 years in service. As the crisis in Iraq was growing, Walz had earned the highest enlisted rank for his unit, but he was an outspoken critic of the war. So Walz retired from service so that he could run for office. He successfully flipped a Minnesota House seat from red to blue, and Walz's former unit ended up being deployed 2 months after Walz retired. Facts matter, but words can stick, so let's remember the Swift Boat campaign attack against then-Senator John Kerry, who was reaching for the Oval Office. Kerry, who served in Vietnam, became a vocal critic. A bunch of veterans devised a campaign against him around his service in a Swift boat. The smear was enough to not only prevent him from victory, it was an effective smear, but it's become a part of the political vocabulary now. And it's worth noting that one of those Vietnam veterans, Chris LaCivitka, who led the Swift Boat campaign, is now a senior advisor to the Trump campaign.
Well, the problem for Walz, as I see it, is that he's been talking about his service in a way that is perhaps dishonest. In a clip shared by the Harris campaign, Walz told an audience in 2018 that he carried guns in war when there's no evidence Walz engaged in active combat. Let's watch.
I spent 25 years in the Army, and I hunt. And I gave the money back, and I'll tell you what I have been doing. I've been voting for common sense legislation that protects the Second Amendment, but we can do background checks. We can do CDC research. We can make sure we don't have reciprocal carry among states, and we can make sure that those weapons of war that I carried in war is the only place where those weapons are at.
And it's not just Republicans. Even CNN has a problem with Walz's choice of words. Here's CNN correspondent Tom Foreman. Let's watch.
Walz did make a comment, speaking to a group, he's done it a couple of times, where he has used language that has suggested that he carried weapons in a fighting situation. As you know, with your contact with the military, I know from coming from a military family, there is a difference between being in a combat area, being involved at a time of war, and actually being in a position where people are shooting at you. There is no evidence that at any time Governor Walz was in a position of being shot at, and some of his language could easily be seen to suggest that he was. So that is absolutely false.
Harris and Walz have tried to quash the accusations and released a statement saying, quote, in his 24 years of service, the governor carried, fired, and trained others to use weapons of war innumerable times. Governor Walz would never insult or undermine any American's service to the country. In fact, he thanks Senator Vance for putting his life on the line for our country. It's the American way.
Now, I think that it's important to note a few things. I want us to be very clear about the timeline here. So in February 2005, Walz filed paperwork to run for Congress. Then in March 2005, the Guard announced possible deployment to Iraq within 2 years. In May of 2005, Walz retired from the National Guard. In July of 2005, that is when Walz's former unit received deployment orders. And in March 2006, his former unit deployed. Now, Walz was born in 1964 when he retired from the National Guard. He was 41 years old. Now, I do think it's a bit silly that we only call it a war if war is officially declared when the United States is in combat zones all across the country. I think many people would say where the United States is involved in combat zones, in operations in Afghanistan and across the Middle East, many people would call that war, that there's violence there, that the U.S. military is there, and they're conducting an operation. So him saying, I carried a weapon in war, I don't think a lot of people would split hairs in the way Republicans are trying to.
Well, I don't think, in fairness, I don't think that's the issue here. Well, yes, we've been involved in conflicts that are undeclared wars, and we should call them wars. Sure, that's not really what's being scrutinized here is him saying in war, which implying in combat, seeing action in some fighting theater.
During his time in service.
But he was not deployed to he did not see combat. He did not see action, which is a specific terminology. He was not engaged in, he trained other people to use weapons who used those in active combat, but he was not in combat himself, which is fine. You can obviously serve our country.
His statement's false, though. His statement was,
the statement is an
carried a weapon
exaggeration.
in war.
No.
He was deployed. He carried a weapon there.
I think, I'm not going to make a mountain out of molehill. I'm not going to say this is the biggest deal ever in the world, and maybe Republicans are trying to make a bigger deal of it than it is. And I'm sure we can find plenty of examples going the other way of people, of Republicans. I'm sure other Democrats, of everyone. It is common for political figures to exaggerate the level of danger they were in, not even when they served, but when they took trips to the Middle East. Hillary Clinton did that. Journalists have done that. It's a very common thing. Tim Walz has, in my view, exaggerated his involvement in combat. He has suggested that he was he exchanged fire, that he was in combat.
When did he say
When he
that?
said that
No,
he
he
was
did not.
in war.
No.
And made a reference to carrying guns in that war, to using the guns. He didn't do that, so it was an exaggeration, and he shouldn't have said it. I don't think it's the biggest deal ever, but I think it's a clear exaggeration.
He was deployed during the U.S. war in Afghanistan, and he carries a weapon as someone who is deployed as a command sergeant major. That is his official post. His statement was true, and his statement was about gun control. He said, we can make sure that those weapons of war that I carried in war, the United States was at war. He was deployed during Afghanistan, not Iraq, Afghanistan. And he said, it's the only place where those weapons are at. He wants to make sure of that. I think that's very reasonable to say. And to say that this is dishonest when he was serving in the National Guard before he retired.
Retired right before he would have been sent to Iraq. I think that is probably the more serious accusation.
He was 41 years old, so he would not have seen combat anyway. He filed paperwork in February of 2005. And in March of 2005, he said that he was willing to go overseas. He was willing to be in Iraq. He said, I would rather...
He said that, but then he did not make that choice.
So let me finish my point. He said, I'm fortunate enough to have a strong group of enthusiastic supporters and a very dedicated and intelligent wife. Both will be a major part of my campaign. Whether I'm in Minnesota or Iraq, I'm dedicated to serving my country to the best of my ability, whether it is in Washington, D.C. or Iraq. Now, months later, before his unit deployed, he said that he got advice that because he was against the war in Iraq and was a vocal opponent to it, and because he was actively campaigning, he could violate the Hatch Act. And that's why he decided to retire. He wouldn't have seen combat at 41 anyway.
Mainstream reporting suggests that he knew that his unit was going to get called up, and he decided to retire.
And that's wrong. That's not the actual timeline.
That is, they weren't called up until after he retired, but he had an inkling that they were going to be called up.
No. He filed paperwork with the FEC to run in February 2005. This was before the Guard even announced possible deployment. This is reporting from the National Guard in Minnesota, from his unit. March of 2005 was the first time they even knew of possible
Yes,
deployment.
he'd already decided to run, but he could have run and continued to serve. Look, people can make whatever they want of the facts. His unit got sent to Iraq, and he got out of it because he decided to run for Congress. You're right, he was not going to be in active combat. That's exactly what happened.
No, his unit was deployed after he decided to run for Congress. He decided to run for Congress. The FEC paperwork shows February 2005. His unit didn't even know there was potential they would be deployed until March 2005, and they were not deployed until a year later in March 2006.
But he knew they were going to be deployed and then decided to retire.
No,
he'd already decided to run for Congress.
They announced a possible deployment within 2 years after he
That's
started
what I said.
his
He
campaign.
knew there was a possibility, a strong possibility of being deployed, and thus decided to get out of it. At the time where he got out of it, where he retired, he knew that unit with a high likelihood would be going to Iraq.
He decided to retire because he was told he could violate the Hatch Act by running for public office and being against the war while serving.
That sounds like a convenient
The
excuse.
Hatch Act limits political activities of federal employees, which he was as a command sergeant major.
That sounds like a very convenient excuse to me. People can make whatever they want of it, but the fact remains that the people he served with in that unit, they got sent to Iraq, and he didn't.
I think it's
because
really,
he went to Congress.
It's really rich that the right wing, the conservatives in the country who really respect,
J.D. Vance went to Iraq.
Supposedly respect service, yeah, but he hasn't served for 24 years like Tim Walz has.
Okay.
And he's not a high-ranking officer like Tim Walz is. A command sergeant major is one of the most respected positions in the U.S. military, and someone who served for 24 years being told they have stolen valor is ridiculous coming from these people who
some people are going to find it are going to have more
serve.
respect for the person who actually went to Iraq. That's all I'm saying.
I have respect for someone who gave 24 years of their life to public service in the National Guard and is a command sergeant major. Just because he didn't get deployed during the Iraq War and actually was one of those people who said, maybe we shouldn't start never-ending wars in the Middle East. I think people respect and appreciate that perspective more. He's much older than J.D. Vance and much more experienced than J.D. Vance, and I think that's why he's going to be a better vice president than J.D. Vance.
All right, you tell us what you think. We'll have more Rising right after this.
All right, Robby, what's on your radar today?
Well, now that Minnesota Governor Tim Walz has become Vice President Kamala Harris's running mate, it is ostensibly time for the media to scrutinize his record and past statements. Emphasis on ostensibly, to say that the mainstream coverage of Walz has been fawning thus far would be quite the understatement. The New York Times has described him as, quote, a one-man rejoinder to the idea that the Democrats are the party of the cultural and coastal elite. It's a nice thing to say about someone. The Atlantic has merrily aided widespread media efforts to portray Walz as lovable, folksy, a paternal figure, writing that dad is on the ballot. It's dad, 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 everyone calling him dad. CNN has proclaimed the Harris-Walz team as an antidote to Trump's American carnage. Kamala Harris and Tim Walz want to make America joyful again. That's CNN's Stephen Collinson, an analyst. The task of scrutinizing Walz will clearly fall to other interested parties. See my radar from yesterday on Walz's COVID-era policies, which were, in my view, tyrannical and wrong. And so alternative and contrarian media is mostly involved in the efforts to find Walz's weaknesses. Conservatives on social media did manage to dig up an old clip of Walz making an alarming and false claim. He said, quote, there's no guarantee to free speech on misinformation and hate speech, especially around our democracy. That's the quote. Walz is wrong, of course. The First Amendment, which vigorously protects Americans' free speech rights, does not distinguish between good information and misinformation. Moreover, so-called hate speech, an arbitrary category, is as different people find different sorts of speech to be hateful. It's quite obviously protected speech, protected from government interference. Now, that clip of Walz, the sentence I read, is from a clip that is only 8 seconds long, and I'm always wary of taking people out of context. So I went looking for the rest of the clip, was able to find it online and track it down, and so we're going to play that now. Here it is.
Yeah, years ago, it was the little things, telling people to vote the day after the election. And, you know, we kind of brushed them off. Now we know it's intimidation at the ballot box. It's undermining the idea that mail-in ballots aren't legal. I think we need to push back on this. There's no guarantee to free speech on misinformation or hate speech, and especially around our democracy. Tell the truth where the voting places are, who can vote, who's able to be there. And watching some states continue to weaken the protections around the ballot, I think, is what inspiring us to lean into this. Again, all we're asking is to make it as easy and simple as possible to exercise their right to vote and participate in our democracy. And I'm in 100% agreement with you. That makes it so that more people are there. You get more opinions brought in. And I think it tempers that extremes that we get.
That was Walz's response to a question from MSNBC about trying to trick people into voting or voting incorrectly. Now, I'm going to read it again just so there's no misunderstanding. I transcribed what he said, and he said, years ago, it was the little things telling people to vote the day after the election, and we kind of brushed them off. Nowadays, we know it's intimidation at the ballot box. It's undermining the idea that mail-in ballots aren't legal. I think we need to push back on this. There's no guarantee to free speech on misinformation and hate speech, especially around our democracy. Tell the truth where the voting places are, who can vote, who's able to be there. Watching some states continue to weaken this protection around the ballot are, I think, what's inspiring us to lean into this again. What we're all asking is to make it easy and simple to exercise our right to vote and participate in our democracy, end quote. Okay, suffice it to say, the surrounding context does not greatly improve the accuracy of Walz's remark. It's unfortunately true that false statements about the time, place, and manner of voting in U.S. elections have occasionally been criminalized. For instance, the Justice Department prosecuted a man named Douglas Mackey for making jokes online encouraging Democrats to vote over the phone. Ha ha. Now, the authorities cited an obscure law from 1870 that was aimed at protecting the Ku Klux Klan, preventing the Ku Klux Klan from threatening black voters away from the polls. The Volokh conspiracy's Eugene Volokh, a law professor, was disturbed by the government's actions and wrote that the authorities were entering murky territory. Now, if Walz had said that deliberately misinforming specific people about how and when to vote can be considered a criminal action under certain circumstances, then yes, he would have been on solid ground. But he was obviously making a much more general claim about spreading so-called election-related misinformation. Lumping in hate speech only weakens the claim even further. The Supreme Court has held labeling speech as hateful does not render it unsayable. Indeed, the First Amendment is specifically designed to protect speech in the event that government authorities attempt to suppress it on such grounds as it being deemed hateful. As Justice Samuel Alito wrote in his opinion on behalf of a unanimous court in the case of Mattel versus Tom, speech that demeans on the basis of race, ethnicity, gender, religion, age, disability, or any other similar ground is hateful, but the proudest boast of our free speech jurisprudence is that we protect the freedom to express the thought that we hate. Now, Walz is hardly the first political figure to make this mistake. High-level government and media actors who ought to know better frequently suggest that bad, wrong, and hateful speech is illegal. Here was Democratic Senator Ben Cardin at a congressional hearing 2 years ago.
If you espouse hate, if you espouse violence, you're not protected under the First Amendment. So I think we can be more aggressive in the way that we handle that type of use of the internet. We know that Europe has done things. I think we have to learn from each other.
Whew. Once again, that line about hate speech is dead wrong. But in a way, it's Walz's invocation of the dreaded specter of misinformation that's especially concerning to me, given the current moral panic around the concept. As I've previously explained, an ever-expanding web of academic departments, quasi-governmental organizations, media watchdog groups, and publicly funded nonprofits have made it their business to police so-called misinformation on social media. Federal bureaucrats have encouraged content moderators to suppress speech, including jokes about elections. Government authorities frequently act as if they have the power to compel Americans to stop saying contrarian and satirical things about a range of political topics. Sadly, they've often gotten away with it. This is why Walz's misunderstanding about misinformation is so important. With the Supreme Court having declined recently, unfortunately, to prohibit federal agencies from job-owning social media companies, the next administration will have a relatively free hand to escalate the government's pressure campaign on disinfo. It's not an encouraging sign to me that the would-be VP is fundamentally mistaken on a vital tenet of the U.S.'s free speech tradition. Maybe Dad should learn something about the First Amendment.
So, Robby, you agree that the First Amendment protects speech with the exception of the precedent upheld by the Supreme Court multiple times, that unless there's clear and present danger, and that doctrine holding that states could only restrict speech that, quote, is directed to inciting or producing imminent lawless action and is likely to incite or produce such action.
Right. There are a couple recognized exceptions to free speech, including the ones you just laid out: incitement to violence, libel, slander, etc. These are very, very narrowly crafted exceptions. They do not generally apply to misinformation or hate speech.
Right. And so Walz's direct statement was that there is no guarantee that hateful speech is protected, right? That's what you quoted him saying.
Yeah, but there is a guarantee that hateful speech is protected.
Not if that
slanderous
speech is determined to have a clear and present danger, right?
No, it has to be violent speech, not just hateful speech. You could say something hateful about someone's religion or their appearance or their family. You have to threaten violence, and you have to threaten it specifically, like, this is when I am going to commit the violence. You have to say, we should go out and kill this person at this time, and there has to be a reasonable expectation that it's a serious threat, not just a vague pronouncement to violence or lawless action. If it is specific enough, it can be in violation of, it can be a crime.
Yeah, we're on the same page about that. But do you agree that sometimes hateful speech is violent?
Yes.
So
sometimes, yes.
What Walz said is then accurate in a legal sense, right?
No.
That there's no
It's
guarantee
absolutely inaccurate.
That hate speech is protected, because sometimes, as you just said, hate speech is violent, and that is what is not protected under the Supreme Court.
If he had said hate speech is vigorously protected by the First Amendment unless your hateful speech is a call to imminent lawless action and violence, then he would have been correct. But he said hate speech itself. What he suggested was that because it is hateful, it is not protected, or because it is misinformation, it is not protected. And you can be wrong, you can be hateful, your speech is protected by the First Amendment. That's exactly what the First Amendment does protect. And again, it's important because federal agents have been trying to get what they've deemed misinformation, and oftentimes I don't even think it's misinformation, suppressed widely on social media. They've been forcing the companies to do that.
But also, after Donald Trump's attempted assassination, you had people like his own son posting on X, and a lot of conservative commentators saying that this was an act of violence incited by the hateful speech of Democrats and the left.
That's a BS.
Right.
That's total BS. I said it was BS. I said it at the time.
So
totally against that.
I'm just demonstrating it doesn't just come from the left when this happens,
No,
Robby.
I didn't make that claim.
I think it's important to be very specific about what Walz said. Speech that demeans on the basis of race, ethnicity, gender, religion, age, disability, or any other similar ground is hateful. But the proudest boast of our free speech jurisprudence is that we protect the freedom to express the thought that we hate.
That's the quote from Alito. That's the Supreme Court. Yeah.
Yes. So, you are free to express the thought that you hate, but sometimes when you say hateful things, you are also saying violent things. Therefore, Walz's statement that there's no guarantee of protection doesn't apply to all hate speech. It's not that there is a guarantee that it's protected. There's just no guarantee when you say certain things, because if they are violent, if they present a clear and present danger determined by a court, they're not guaranteed to be protected.
Right, but what makes it unprotected is not that it's hateful, but that it's violent. The hate part is a distraction. And it's an important one because
sometimes hateful speech is violent, Robby.
And sometimes non-hateful speech is violent.
Exactly, that's why there's no guarantee.
Violence. Right, but
he didn't say every time you say something hateful, you're going to get in trouble with the law, did he?
He said hateful speech is not protected, and it is. And he's
That's
not the first person to say that.
That is
As
not
I
his
played Ben
words,
Cardin saying
Robby.
that. It is something frequently said by people, by
but not
Democratic
by
political
Walz,
figures.
which is what you made this radar.
That's exactly what he said. That's word for word what he said.
No, he said there is no guarantee He did not say every time you say something
He said
hateful,
there's no
it is against
guarantee
the law.
for hateful speech.
To
There
be
is a guarantee
protected.
for hateful speech.
There's no guarantee for hateful speech to be protected because sometimes hateful speech presents a clear and present danger, which is the Supreme Court precedent of free speech that is not protected.
Then would you say it's accurate to say there's no guarantee that political speech is protected?
Right, because sometimes political speech is violent and hateful and presents a clear and present danger. If you are inciting a mob of violence and you're like, but this is my political position, that is not protected under the Constitution of the United States.
Right, for those clarifying reasons. But the fact that it would be wrong to say political speech is not protected. It would be wrong to say religious speech is not protected. It would be wrong to say dissent is not protected. Those things are all protected unless they satisfy some extremely narrow criteria, like very, very narrow criteria that they have evolved into violent action. So to imply that speech is impermissible because it's hateful or because it's misinformation misses, in my view, the entire point of the First Amendment. Walz is not at all alone in committing this error, but it is an error, and it reflects bad judgment given that if he and Kamala win, they'll be in charge of a massive federal bureaucracy that has made its mission to destroy dissenting and contrarian opinions online in the last however many years. And we need someone who understands the limits of, I'm not the only one making a big deal about this. I saw Glenn Greenwald, for instance, tweeted out this clip and said that Walz is totally wrong, and I can pull up exactly what he said, but again, Glenn was concerned and said this is a one of the most esteemed First Amendment free speech expert journalists was worried by this statement and thought it was, here I found out, he says, Tim Walz falsely believes the free speech guarantee doesn't include what he considers to be misinformation or hate speech, will bother almost no Dem supporters since the vast majority of them want the state to be empowered to censor dissent. So this is bad, and I'm calling people's attention to it, in my view.
Just because Glenn Greenwald said it doesn't mean it's true. Constitutional lawyers uphold the president. The Supreme Court has written it in every decision they've had to uphold the clear and present danger exception. And to split hairs and try and find these little things.
I'm not splitting hairs. You're splitting hairs to find a way to make it defensible when it's not.
It is defensible.
It's absolutely
There is not a
It's
guarantee
totally wrong.
to free speech on misinformation and hate speech
Yes,
because
there is.
those two things can present a clear and present danger.
Well, then that's just like saying there's not a guarantee to free speech, period.
No, there's an exception, and it's when there's a clear and present danger. Misinformation and hate speech.
Okay, so you would say there's no protection for free speech. So you would say there's no guarantee that speech is protected. You would make that statement.
There is no guarantee that speech is protected if it presents a clear and present danger. That is the precedent upheld by the Supreme Court.
He didn't add those little...
He said there's no guarantee.
Well, right, but there is a guarantee
to specifically
that speech that is hateful
misinformation and hate speech, which is the kind of speech that can present
I think we're
a
not
clear and
disagreeing
present
on the
danger.
underlying issue because there's no disagreement.
It's just that I don't think Walz believes what you think Walz believes.
I think he absolutely does. Well, I don't know what he believes. I just know what he said, and what he said was inaccurate, but...
I think you're reading a lot into what he said, though, Robby.
Okay. You guys let me know what you think about this. More Rising right after this.
England is still in chaos after a week of riots and looting. It began when anti-immigration riots fanned across the UK earlier this week. To counter, thousands of anti-racism protesters went to places far-right groups had demonstrated just days before. Holding banners saying, "Stop the far right," "We'll trade racists for refugees," and "Fight racism," the protests were made up of Muslims and anti-racist groups, trade unionists, left-wing organizations, and local citizens.
Elon Musk has been going at Britain's Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who has served as leader of the Labour Party since 2020, is now the Prime Minister, about the riots. Over the past few days, Musk has commented about the protests, writing on X, "Civil war is inevitable. Why aren't all communities protected in Britain?" Keir Starmer. He also replied to a post on X saying, "Britain is turning into the Soviet Union." Musk wrote, "Seriously."
UK Justice Minister Heidi Alexander responded to Musk's comments, quote, "Use of language such as civil war is in no way acceptable. We are seeing police officers being seriously injured, buildings set alight, and so I really do think that everyone who has a platform should be exercising their power responsibly. Now, Politico also reported on Elon Musk posting on X a fake headline. It looked like it was from The Telegraph. It was not. It said that UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer is, quote, considering building emergency detainment camps on the Falkland Islands to house far-right rioters arrested in the country's race riots. The photo was actually posted by Ashleigh Simon, the co-leader of Britain First, which is a far-right party in the UK. And so I think it's kind of rich that Elon is posting fake news at a time when he took over X wanting free speech, saying he was going to get rid of bots, get rid of the fake news. Clearly, that's not happening. And I think what Elon Musk is doing in the UK is just a little bit disgusting. He seems to be obsessed with this kind of racial tension, to be against refugees in the UK and against immigration so much, but to be worried about population decline and wanting more people to give birth. It really does paint the picture that the replacement theory reporting had some truth to it about people like Tucker Carlson and Elon Musk.
Should Elon Musk be put in prison for having shared something that was inaccurate or satirical? Should he, that's what he's complaining about, is this entire ideology of progressives that is popular in Europe and in England, that saying something that they disagree with should land you in prison, should be disallowed. He was referring to the UK as the Soviet Union, as becoming like the Soviet Union, because of the arrest of a 28-year-old man has been charged with inciting racial hatred for making a post on Facebook. And so the statement from the minister that you better be awfully careful about what you write and what you say on social media, because if you're contributing to public upsetness, we're gonna shut that down, we're gonna do something about you, we're gonna arrest you. I mean, this is exactly why I'm being so zealously guarding and protecting of our First Amendment freedoms here in the US, the freedom to engage in misinformation or hate speech or whatever the authorities are calling it, because other countries don't have this robust tradition and they don't have these protections. I agree with Elon or disagree with Elon all the time. I do not think civil war is inevitable or even likely. Whenever people on the right say, oh, we're about to have another civil war, I'm like, Who's going to fight this? Who's going to engage in the streets? What we've seen is that a bunch of crazy lefty Antifa people and a bunch of far-right Proud Boy type people like to beat each other up in some of the major cities on the West Coast, and that's about it. There's not going to be like an armed insurgency against the government. Don't expect that to happen. The talk of that is just like kind of like cosplaying or role-playing or something like that. So I disagree with these people all the time, but I support your right to say things, even things that are wrong, on social media. I support your right to be upset about the immigration and refugee policies if you're upset about them in Europe. I don't live in Europe, so I don't know how they're affecting life there, but a lot of people, not just far-right people, but I think the majority of people think that they've absorbed too many refugees and that it is harming the social fabric of the country and it's contributing to crime and other things in Europe, not in the US.
What does it mean to harm the social fabric of a country?
To cause public disorder, crime, economic problems, to erode the national identity.
Sounds like that's exactly what the far right's doing in the UK. They're burning police precincts, buildings, police cars.
Now I was told rioting and burning things is the language of the unheard, and we have to put up with it endlessly. Now, all of a sudden, progressive left-wing people are like, oh, lock all these people up. How dare you light a match anywhere? How dare you do any of that? And I'm being perfectly consistent. I absolutely think that anyone who engages in property destruction, sets things on fire, doing any of that, lock them up. Absolutely. No right to do any of that. I want to see none of that sort of thing anywhere. I don't want to see it in my country. I'm sure people in the UK don't want to see it either. A lot of these protests have become riots and are based on faulty ideas and should be absolutely punished. But it's interesting that left people have finally found a civil disordered protest that they don't like.
Yeah. So, okay. To say that rioting is the voice of the unheard and assume that applies to white people in the UK is laughable.
Only non-white people are allowed to riot violently?
The fact that white people in the UK believe they are unheard is one of the funniest things I've ever heard.
Okay.
So this 28-year-old, you believe that he shouldn't be punished for what he said because it was hateful. Why? Do you know what he said?
I don't know what he said, but
okay,
I
then
generally
maybe I'd be
believe people
careful
should not
about
be arrested
saying
for things they write on Facebook.
He said that the far-right mobs should smash the F out of a hotel that was holding asylum seekers.
Okay.
Do you think that presents a clear danger?
Do you think everyone who said, burn this mother effer down, talking about a police precinct, should have been jailed for that? How is that different?
Who said that?
I'm sure we can find some examples of lefty Antifa people
Then I think you
saying
should
that.
find someone saying that.
Okay.
But this person was arrested because they had speech that was inciting violence. That was speech that called for a clear and present danger to smash the F out of a hotel.
If we don't get what we want, we're going to burn it down is something we heard from all sorts of left-wing protesters over here. And they actually did do it.
He said specifically to smash the F out of a specific hotel that was holding refugees and asylum seekers. That's what we're talking about right now. Threatening violence against people is very different from the destruction of property, but he said to smash
not
the
to
F.
me.
Right, and so you would think that someone who's 28 years old posting this is not just someone posting, a political ideology or something hateful. I think if you are a Nazi and you believe in that ideology, you can talk about it all you want. I support free speech. I don't support violence against immigrants simply because they are immigrants.
I don't support violence against anyone. I don't support any violence. I don't support any property destruction.
But you support someone's right to incite violence? To say, smash the F out of this hotel that's housing immigrants?
I'd have to look at this specific post to see if I thought it was incitement.
Okay, yeah. I think it's important to look at the post before you defend someone who's questioning the arrest of
I'm generally going to defend people for saying, not for doing, but for saying crazy, alarming stuff.
Yeah, I think what's going on in England is scary because we've seen the police respond to so many of these instances in a way where there was one case where it was a black man surrounded by a group of these white guys, and they were kind of roughing him up. The police got involved and ended up getting really handsy with the black guy. And I think that seeing immediately they respond to a scene and they address it by, roughing up the victim of a lynch mob is crazy. And that's why I think a lot of these anti-racist protesters have mobilized, which is something we talked about earlier in the week. I was hopeful that people would see this happening in their communities and, protect these people, and that's what they've done. They've decided to be human shields around immigration centers that far-right groups plan to target, and just this week of violent riots fueled by misinformation. I would be upset if I thought people were being detained and put in these camps like Elon Musk posted. So I think everyone needs to be careful about what they post in the direction of, not wanting people to be targeted for simply being immigrants.
More Rising right after this.
Walz is a, quote, excellent guy. That's how then President Trump described the former Minnesota governor in 2020, following the killing of George Floyd and the handling of the protests that ensued. ABC News first reported the story from an audio clip that it obtained of a phone call Trump had with a group of governors. He sang praises about Walz, saying he, quote, dominated Minneapolis. Let's watch.
I fully agree with the way he handled it the last couple of days. I asked him to do that, and the whole world was laughing. 3 days later, I spoke to the governor. The governor's, I think, on the call, and he's an excellent guy. You've got a big National Guard out there that's ready to come in and fight like hell. I tell you, the best, what they did in Minneapolis was incredible. They went in and dominated, and it happened immediately. Tim is on the phone now, Tim Walz. Again, I was very happy with the last couple of days, Tim. You called up big numbers, and the big numbers knocked them out so fast it was like bowling pins.
4 years later, Trump is singing a different tune. Here he is on a phone call with Fox News earlier this week. Let's listen.
I never thought this was going to be the one that was picked. I know him a little bit. I helped him very much during the riots because his house was surrounded by people that were waving an American flag. Doesn't sound like very bad people. And he called me, and he was very concerned, very, very concerned that it was going to get out of control. They only had one guard. I guess it was at the mansion or at his house in some form. And he called me. I said, what do you want me to do about it? I was in the White House. He said, if you would put out the word that I'm a good person. He's a very, very liberal man, and he's a shocking pick, and I'm thrilled. I could not be more thrilled.
Trump running mate J.D. Vance has taken a few swipes at Walz on his handling of the George Floyd protests and more. Let's watch.
Tim Walz is a person, again, who promoted rioters burning down the biggest city in his state. This is a guy who wants to give driver's licenses to illegal aliens. This is a guy who wants to take children away from their parents if those parents don't consent to sex changes for minors. This is a radical human being who comes from the far left wing of the Democrat Party.
So Donald Trump changed his mind about Tim Walz. What should we make of this?
Yeah, I think it's interesting how Trump manages to change his mind about things that have happened, not just his opinions of people, and tells J.D. Vance, and J.D. Vance just takes the information without fact-checking it. It's honestly amazing because Tim Walz called in the National Guard. It wasn't that, as Trump puts it, he told him to, and then he did. Before Trump even talked about it, Walz had met with his mayor there in Minneapolis, and on the 28th of May 2020 called in the National Guard. Trump didn't say anything about this until June 19th of 2020, claiming he forced the Democrat-run Minnesota to bring in the National Guard, but the email trail shows they did not even talk about it. And Walz called it in before, as a lot of people have gotten this wrong, the precinct was burnt down. So I think that they're just running on things that are not true because they have just run against their policies, run against things they actually support and believe in and things they actually did. The fact that they're running against made up stuff shows they don't actually have a campaign against Harris and Walz.
Yeah, look, in this case, I think it's not ideal that Trump said nice things about Walz at the time. And, as I've said many times, it would be great if Republicans had a stronger candidate of their own for all the complaining they're doing that, the Democrats swapped out their candidate when he was flailing and got one that is, at least on paper, doing better. That's not fair. It's like, well, you could do that too. You could get if the hardcore base of the Republican Party that is just desperately clinging to Trump still could let the party have a more popular candidate, this election would be a knockout, blowout for anyone else with an R next to their name, but it's Donald Trump. So they have a candidate who unfortunately praised Tim Walz, shouldn't have, but did because Trump is not an ideological thinker, or if the person, he wants to get along with him and they've said nice things to him and they're not in his way or saying bad things about him, then he's all for him. He doesn't care. He doesn't care about anything beyond that, and so that's where we are. And so he looks like a hypocrite for now saying that Tim Walz was bad or Tim Walz didn't handle it correctly when he didn't say that initially. And I think it very well may be the case that Tim Walz didn't handle it correctly or perfectly, or there'd be ways to pick holes in how he handled it. But Trump wanted to get along with him at the time, so he didn't choose that tactic, and here we are.
Yeah, I think Tim Walz is one of those guys that's popular among people on the right and left. That's how he won in a red district. Trump is someone who does this. I wish he would do it in a way where he's like, yeah, I did think he did a good job, but I've changed my mind for these reasons. We don't get that from him. J.D. Vance, however, we don't get that from him either, because this is a guy.
We don't get what from him?
Like a reason for his changed perspective on someone. Trump is a little bit more extreme because it's changing a recounting of events. But J.D. Vance is someone who said Donald Trump is like Hitler.
Well, I don't think it's fair to say we haven't gotten an explanation for that. You can reject his explanation, but he said that his stated explanation is that he thought Trump was fake, was not actually going to do any of the things he said he would do about delivering for working people, was not sincere, was not all of those things, and then he turned out to be, in J.D. Vance's view, a good president who was delivering on the promises he made, and so he changed his mind about him.
Yeah, but we don't know why. We still don't know, what is Trump doing that's different? What policies is he promising now that he wasn't before? We don't get that from J.D. Vance. We also don't get an explanation for why he's saying these things, a different recounting of the facts. He would have to find this information out either from Donald Trump and take his word for it, or he could just look at the reporting on what actually happened. And the fact that he's not does not make me confident in the vice presidential pick on top of Trump. It's a liability.
All right, more Rising right after this.
Kamala Harris is pulling ahead of Donald Trump. According to a new Marquette University Law School survey, Harris tops Trump by 6 points, 53% to 47% among likely voters nationwide. The poll published Thursday shows that when an independent candidate is introduced, she still leads Trump with 47% support compared to his 41% and 9% going to independent RFK Jr. In a multi-candidate field, Harris maintains the lead at 50%, Trump at 42%, RFK Jr. at 6%, Libertarian Chase Oliver at 1%, and Green Party candidate Jill Stein at 1%, and Cornel West at 0%.
The tides do seem to have shifted a little since Harris replaced Biden at the top of the ticket. Another survey conducted by the Cook Political Report shows that battleground states Arizona, Nevada, and Georgia are now a toss-up. Last month, Trump had maintained a lead in all three. As of today, Harris leads Trump by less than 1 point, a shift of more than 3 points in Harris's direction. It's impossible to overstate how close the election is right now. The swing states are all virtually tied. You've had a variety of polls. Some show Harris up a little bit, some show Trump up a little bit. In Michigan, that was a more favorable polling for Harris. Pennsylvania was more favorable for Trump. They're effectively toss-ups. Wisconsin is in that bucket too. And then you have the kind of the southern, southwest swing states, Arizona, Nevada, and then Georgia in the south. These are the 6 states that are most likely to decide the election. There's, a couple different ways to slice them where, if they all go to one candidate or the other, then that's the whole ball game. Whoever wins Pennsylvania is going to be really well positioned because Pennsylvania has a very large number of electoral votes. Michigan and Pennsylvania usually go the same way. They have in all the recent election cycles. But if they split for some reason, then it could come down to Georgia. So it's, we're all picking at our maps to find different strategies for our candidate. There's one crazy scenario because there's a couple states, Maine is one of them, where the electoral votes get split, where it's possible, the 3 electoral votes, it could be 1 for one candidate, 2 for the others. So it is possible to construct a scenario where they have an exact tie, which would be real fun. The people writing and planning this season of American political life, that's the season finale I would like to see. But any way you slice it, this election is incredibly close. That's why every little decision does matter. For instance, we've talked about the VP pick a lot in the last, just in the last 3 days. It was this week it happened. I know. It feels like we've been talking about it
for years.
For years. It was Monday. Dear God, is this real? Is there a world out there beyond this studio? Have we just been here all our lives? We're like waiting for Godot at this point.
That's how I'm gonna feel if this election is a dead tie, Robby. That cannot happen. Not how after the last election, which was close, went. But I do think Harris did not do herself any favors last night in Michigan. So she was, giving a speech. She had met with some organizers for Palestine beforehand. They had talked about their demands and an immediate ceasefire. It was a productive conversation, it seems, from the reporting. We know that she's called for a ceasefire, but what we want is an immediate and permanent ceasefire, and we want an arms embargo. We don't want Netanyahu getting more weapons from the United States for this assault on Gaza. And so, some pro-Palestine protesters were shouting, and she said, if you want Donald Trump to win, say that. Otherwise, I'm speaking.
Yeah, so we're actually going to hold your commentary. We're going to do subsequently. We're going to show the clip and talk about it.
In Michigan specifically, that matters. So when we're looking at the polling and we're looking at swing states, that could be a circumstance where, maybe she wins Pennsylvania, but not Michigan. I don't know how many voters will be impacted by this. We need a public stance. A lot of Michigan voters and organizers are looking for this from Kamala Harris on Gaza before the election. Otherwise, that would be crazy, but she could win PA, but not Michigan.
Well, we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute.
Yes, we'll show the clip.
Yes, every little thing is going to matter. I think a debate between Trump and Harris, if it does take place, is actually going to matter. It turned out, people say, it's become common wisdom that the debates don't actually matter. If you think about it, the Trump-Biden debate, which took place, again, and that was only, a month and a half ago or something?
Mattered more than any debate ever,
That was the most important political debate in American history. That changed the trajectory of, we have forked onto a different path because that debate took place, because it caused Biden to drop out. Trump's got to be kicking himself a little bit for agreeing to do this debate before the nominating convention. If they had not done this debate, and it's clear, all of Biden's people, his inner circle, were determined to drag him over the finish line. They were not, there was going to be no, Karine Jean-Pierre would be gaslighting you about cheap fake videos and, oh, he's fine. See, look, he can move his, she'll be holding him up with strings. He's fine. Right through to the convention. He would have given a speech at the convention where everyone would have been like, holy shit, he can't talk. But it would have been too late. And then they would have debated, and Donald Trump would have been elected to the presidency comfortably. And that was the future that was going to take place. But because they had the debate with just enough time, I guess they had a little bit of a window, but it's pretty close time period, just enough time to rally the forces for Nancy Pelosi to orchestrate a coup against Joe Biden, which he basically admits to doing. I was just seeing, this on Twitter this morning.
She admits to doing in the most mom boss way possible.
Yeah, I tweeted like she's the queen who never was. She says, wait, let me.
People are calling her the Bene Gesserit, Robby.
Yeah, she said this of Joe. This is a profile of her in the New Yorker. She said of Joe Biden when asked about the effort to push him out, I was never impressed with his political operation. They won the White House, bravo. But my concern was this ain't happening, and we have to make a decision for this to happen. Like, wow, she's saying the quiet part out loud. She's admitting all of this. He's still the president, right? Right? He's still doing. This is. Man, he does not, they don't fear crossing him at all.
She was asked about her relationship with him. If it's fine, how is it? She said, you'll have to ask him. Yeesh. I think we can tell how their relationship is at this point, Robby, but I do think there's a world where Biden and Trump didn't debate. They didn't agree to debate. They were like, you know us, we've both been president, just pick. And they did.
It's not unreasonable.
No, that could have happened. And then they did the convention, and then Biden has his prompter. He does well because it's not a situation where he has to think on his feet.
Yeah.
And he's not prepped with a million talking points he can't remember. It is past his bedtime. The conventions run very late.
Yeah, it's past my bedtime.
He would have spent the morning napping or something. But no, I think he could have done okay at the convention and then been the president. And that would have been worse, somehow worse than, worse than what we have now by a lot. But imagine he gets into office and then we see his cognitive decline, the 25th Amendment's invoked, the country's in chaos. That would be horrible.
Yeah. But for the butterfly flapping its wings a little bit differently, we would be living in a different timeline. I mean, we also almost had the replacement of both major candidates because let us not forget, Donald Trump was in the midst of all this happening very nearly assassinated by a gunman. And that happened in the midst of this. It could have been a transformation of both parties' leadership. That would have been so crazy it's difficult to even contemplate. And it came this close to happening. Still can't believe it. Still processing it. I know most people are. What a summer it's been.
When everyone was saying we're going to forget about Trump's assassination attempt, I was like, that's ridiculous. But then we've had quite a few weeks. We haven't forgotten about it.
Well, we haven't forgotten about it.
I thought it would be
Our viewers, I'm sure, haven't forgotten about it. But some of you have the mainstream media forgotten about it? Where's the...
It's not talked about as much
analysis?
as I think I thought it would be right after it happened, but a lot has happened.
Yeah, maybe nothing's talked about as much as you think it's going to be talked about because just something new happens in our news cycle. Again, I feel like we've been talking about Tim Walz for the entirety of my life, but it has only been since Monday. So,
Robby.
Anyway, we have a lot more to get to in the show today. We will figure out if all of this is real, if it's really happening. Stay tuned for that. More Rising after this. Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris shut down pro-Palestine protesters who interrupted her at her Michigan rally yesterday. They began to chant, "Kamala, Kamala, you can't hide. We won't vote for genocide," to which she recounted one of her infamous lines. Let's watch.
I'm here because we believe in democracy. Everyone's voice matters, but I am speaking now. I am speaking now.
Yeah, so I think
she said, at one point she said, you want to help elect Donald Trump, keep interrupting me, right? That was the line?
She said, if you want Donald Trump to win, then say that. Otherwise, I'm speaking now.
Ugh.
So, yeah, the idea
That's not going to go over well.
Right.
If I know pro-Palestinian people on the left, they're not going to appreciate that very much, am I right?
It's not going to go over well. It's already not going over well. And I think that people know, there's a lot of people in my replies on Twitter right now saying, hey, like, she's the most pro-Palestine candidate. She's the one that called for a ceasefire. And it's like, listen, she needs to call for an arms embargo. She met with organizers about that. She indicated she was open to that. And then she sent 2 of her staff leaders to talk with some of these organizers. Until she publicly says that she supports respecting the conventional arms transfer policy, this is not a radical idea. This prevents the United States from transferring arms to human rights violators, which now Netanyahu is, according to many international laws. That's not radical. That's an easily defensible position. She's called for an immediate ceasefire. We want a permanent one. These are 2 policies that are extremely popular in the United States and very defensible. And the fact that she didn't use this opportunity to address their immediate concerns was such a huge misstep. The only way she can recover from this is this week saying that she supports those 2 things.
Yeah, not only did she fail to address their concerns, I mean, she clearly holds them in contempt. I mean, I've been saying this for a while. I do not personally expect Kamala Harris to have a more progressive Israel policy than Joe Biden. In fact, it would not surprise me if her policy is even more pro-Israel. Where this remains to be seen, but she is part of the administration that has engaged in all of the vigorous support of Netanyahu and of Israel since October 7th, and prior, obviously, to that. Joe Biden has, unlike past presidents, both Republicans and Democrats, who took, I would say, a little bit of a firmer hand with Israel, still supporting it, still giving arms, weapons, financial support, but at various points saying, okay, this has gone too far and this is now going to impact our safety and you can't continue these military actions. Joe Biden has really declined to take that position with Israel. There have been half-hearted at best attempts to constrain the IDF's actions. So, would it be markedly different under Kamala Harris? I don't think she's given much reason to expect that. She did come out in favor of the ceasefire. Of course, she has no power to actually do anything about it. If she did have power to do anything about it, would she still be in support of it? I don't know. I think you can tell how she feels about the Palestinian protesters from her remarks there. I am speaking. You're interrupting me. How dare you? It's not going to win her some fans.
I think that there's not been a reconciliation with the reality that the political world has changed, and so the political game that campaigns run needs to change. Mm-hmm. Think about how old Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi are.
I think about it all the time.
And even Chuck Schumer, right? They're dinosaurs. People have called Congress a nursing home that's publicly funded because of how old our Congress is. These people who run the party didn't have to campaign in a world where things were clipped up and seen by everyone. Yeah. There was a world where Kamala Harris could make deals in back rooms with AIPAC and could say something completely different to pro-Palestine activists. She could have given a speech in Michigan back in the day where she said certain things that would be reported on, but not everyone would see clips of them on their phone screens. And this is a world where she needs to make a public stance, and for some reason there's a calculation happening that instead her public stance will be what satisfies people like AIPAC, people who are pro-Israel major donors, and that maybe people who are close to her on her campaign see that as more of a liability than what public opinion polling shows, which is that actually supporting a permanent ceasefire and peace in the Middle East is very popular, and not giving weapons to Israel is very popular.
And let's pay close attention to what she actually said. She said, if you want to help elect Trump, continue interrupting me, something of that nature. That is exactly the what I've learned from you and people sitting in your chair in the past, that vote blue no matter who mindset that Democratic political figures lean into, saying, oh, you disagree with me on XYZ policy? Oh, so you love Trump then? You want Trump? Is that what you want? Mm-hmm. which is just a way to totally shut down any debate or disagreement about the policy priorities of the Democratic Party. To say that is thus giving license to Kamala Harris or if it was some other, or Joe Biden before him or before her, or whoever the nominee would be, to do whatever policy they want, to disappoint progressives as much as they want because, well, we're not Trump. Mm-hmm. And whether that continues to be persuasive or was ever particularly persuasive, continues to be effective for people on the progressive left, for activists, for people who are very upset with these policy prescriptions, who think Joe Biden is complicit in genocide, certainly remains to be seen. But it should not be encouraging, I think. I don't mean to speak for progressive activists. I'm certainly not one, but I talk to, from doing this show, talk to enough people on the left to understand that is perceived as a deliberately insulting rhetorical tactic to say, oh, so you must want Trump then. It really turns them off.
Yeah, and I think maybe not just them. People who grew up during the Vietnam War era and those protests, these are anti-war protesters. To see someone treat people advocating for peace at a time when there's mass genocide that's American funded is not the time to be condescending. And so I definitely think she lost some points with that. Running on a campaign of, we're not going back to this kind of thinking of, either you vote for the Dems or you're for Trump, vote blue no matter who, is the same kind of thinking that pissed off progressives, because we had Bernie Sanders, who was, a very progressive candidate, a very popular candidate, and you had these same elites in the party saying that they wouldn't vote for him if he was the Democratic nominee, which shows they want the Democratic Party to be a party of centrists, a party of people who would not even question the differentials in wealth and earnings from the ruling class and the working class. The fact that wages are worth so much less and have been stagnant since the 70s, but productivity is higher than ever, and corporate profits are higher than ever. This is something a lot of people care about, not just progressives. This belief that because there's a lot of elites in Washington, that's somehow representative of Democrats or the country is ridiculous, because we've seen that actually taxing wealth and equalizing this is extraordinarily popular. And so making this calculation of satisfying the mega donors and the elites could cost her the election, because money doesn't vote.
More Rising right after this. Has this been the craziest summer in American politics ever? First, Donald Trump trounces Joe Biden in a debate. Then Democrats pressure Joe Biden to drop out of the race, and he refuses. Next up, Trump is very nearly assassinated by a deranged gunman. Then, Biden actually does drop out, and Kamala Harris is coronated as the new Democratic candidate. And here we are. We've added some VPs to the mix, J.D. Vance and Tim Walz. But now, Blaire White, a YouTuber and host of the Blaire White Project podcast, joins me now for a conversation about what is even going on in these exciting times. Welcome to Rising, Blaire.
Thanks for having me.
Great to be with you. So let's talk about how the media is covering the events of the last several weeks. I think it's so interesting that we got, for a brief time, a truly skeptical and scrutinizing and hostile media with respect to Joe Biden when they turned on him and decided, oh my God, we've been lied to, or we know we've been complicit in a lie that now the American people see for themselves, that this man has declined, is cognitively incapable of being president in the future, maybe not even right now, and has to go. And they were relentlessly hostile. And now he's gone, and it's Kamala Harris, and what we've seen, this fawning coverage of her, and then so far the coverage of Walz has also been like weirdly positive, all this kind of dad stuff. What's your take?
Yeah, the Biden stuff to me is interesting because it was really obvious in 2020, in the election leading up last time. I felt like it was just an open sort of thing on the right that was talked about. Obviously, the reason why he was nicknamed Sleepy Joe, of course, by Trump was because he had these cognitive, impairments back then. And, it was due to age. And, there's theories that it's Alzheimer's, and that may be true, but it's been a lie for a long time now. So the fact that it finally took actually a live debate for the other side to see it. I think that oftentimes these lies, and we're talking about the president's fitness being the lie, is just so compartmentalized that perhaps there genuinely was a huge, segment of powerful people on the left who were blindsided by the debate as well. But more people than, you think probably knew, of course. And it was a cover up. And Kamala was a big part of it. The fact that she skyrocketed to Obama #2 is actually quite disturbing. It feels very dark in a way that her entire sort of essence in politics right now is media constructed. I tweeted earlier, or posted on X, I'm trying to not use the word tweet anymore, that she is a media construction, and it's true. She went from the least popular VP in memory, for me at least, and now she's on top. And I've even seen really prominent lefties like Mark Cuban actually acknowledge and tweeted recently that she went from worst to first. And it's like they're just missing that final link to be like, okay, so why are people suddenly liking her? It's because of brainwashing. And we have an entirety of the corporate press that's stacked against Donald Trump. And I think that's obvious and apparent. And for me, that's, there's a million reasons why I'm supporting Donald Trump in this election, but that's one of the biggest ones just on principle, that I don't want to live in a world where we have, the media completely constructing a reality and setting the window of accepted thought. So for me, a vote for Trump is a vote just against the media. Among other things, but
if that debate had not happened, I fully expect that Joe Biden would still be running. His team would still be acting like there is nothing wrong with him, that you are being misled if you are watching videos of him appearing to seem disoriented or needing help getting around. They would still be saying those videos have been altered or clipped in an unfair way. They would be pretending everything is fine. Karine Jean-Pierre would be pretending everything is fine. Kamala Harris would be pretending everything is fine. He would be nominated at the convention. Then people would be like, oh my God, I can't believe this is our candidate, when he tried to give a speech. They would have done a debate afterward, but it would have been too late to swap him out. I bet Donald Trump partly regrets having done that debate prior to Biden actually being the nominee. Maybe he didn't imagine, and I don't blame him for that, because I did not think they would actually switch out Biden. I didn't think he would go. I didn't think they could make him, but finally they put enough pressure to have him do it. I bet there's regret that they did the debate before it was official.
I would imagine. And like you said, it's not as if anyone could predict that. But of course, hindsight, that does seem like, a thing that probably was less in the favor of Trump's chances of winning. But at the end of the day, I think it's important for people to note that the strategy, both for when they ran Biden and now for Kamala, is to hide their candidate as much as humanly possible. A lot of people are rightfully upset about the fact that Kamala has participated in 0 media interviews since she became the de facto, nomination here. And if the assassination on, President Donald Trump had been successful, I think it's worth noting that we'd be living in a reality where both candidates from either side receive no votes to be there. And that's not the America I want to live in. I don't think that's the way the system is intended to be. And it's a pretty dark thought, the idea of like, there are countries that install candidates, right? And for me, it can sound conspiratorial, it can sound extreme, it can sound like I'm paranoid, but it feels as if in the air, there's this energy of they're trying to test and see if they're able to just start installing candidates, because it's not as if there's no genuine momentum for Kamala. I think it could probably be described as a relief from Democrats that like, okay, we have someone, right? Because they were left feeling like they had no one when they saw Biden's ability, and the party was completely demoralized. So I think the bubble of excitement she's having right now is just their idea of like, okay, we have a person that can do this possibly, rather than none. But no one can even really cite what she stands for. I mean, all the way down to the fact that she doesn't have any policies listed on her website, which to me seems disqualifying. What are you bargaining for with America right now? What is the offer to Americans to vote for you? And then I think the popularity she has is completely removed from reality in the sense of they're not actually excited about policy or what she's going to do in office. Yesterday at a rally, she was saying she's going to lower prices and work on inflation. And she's been in office for 4 years and she's currently in office. Some may even say she's acting sort of as the de facto president right now because they don't have faith in Biden's ability to make any decisions. It's a really, really unshaky time. And I think back to the past 2 elections, I think Americans are kind of in this cycle of just expecting some sort of national trauma to occur every election, whether it's lockdowns last time, mail-in votes. A lot of people on the right don't like how that election went down. 2016, this year feels even scarier than the last 2. And I hope that whatever comes with the election, we start to sort of recalibrate and just expect better from our candidates and our parties that are supposed to support democracy when in fact they're installing candidates right now.
And expect better from our media. We will be back with more Rising in just a minute, and we'll have the rest of this interview available over the weekend. You can tune in then.
Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams were blasted into space for an 8-day mission, the first crew to fly Boeing's Starliner capsule. But the issue is that the mission began over 2 months ago. They could be stuck on the International Space Station until early next year due to issues with the Starliner's propulsion system. The issues include faulty thrusters and helium leaks. The malfunctions have called into question the spacecraft's ability to safely return the crew to Earth. They could return in February of 2025 on SpaceX Crew Dragon.
Earlier this month, NASA announced it was still performing safety tests on the capsule, and on Thursday, NASA officials said, quote, "We'll come home when we're ready." Now, the U.S. Space Agency has been discussing possible plans with SpaceX to leave 2 seats empty on an upcoming Crew Dragon launch, which could be Wilmore and Williams' ticket home. So could Elon Musk be coming to the rescue? That's what it sounds like to me, Jessica.
He could. The SpaceX engineers could have built something that could make it there and back. I think, it's scary to be on a mission and be expected home in mid-June. There's all of this reporting on space.com that's like, they're not actually stuck. The propulsion system worked when they docked. Then why are they still in space? They are absolutely stuck.
Yeah.
They say that, we don't understand the issues enough to fix them permanently. The only way we can do that is take time in this unique environment and get more data and run more tests. They supposedly have enough oxygen and food for some time. And supposedly they were aware of the helium leaks early on, but that wasn't a major problem. But what's really the problem is the propulsion system. I think if I were them, I would be freaking out. I would be super claustrophobic, but they're prepared and trained for this. But this is scary. I would be scared.
Oh, yeah. I'm scared on their behalf, but they're keeping cool and making the best of it, and now potentially expected back sometime next year. Wow, it's going to make a great movie one day, praying, assuming everything will work out. Like you said, they do have enough food and water. They're not in imminent danger. It's not about to explode or something. They're just having some issues that NASA is working on that SpaceX might be able to resolve. And so they will very likely be able to get home safely. But it does go to show you that this kind of work is dangerous and takes real bravery and courage to be involved in the space industry, which I think is very important. I want humans to colonize Mars someday, hopefully soon. Our futures lie among the stars. I'm a believer in that. But we are at the we should be grateful to people who are willing to risk their lives, as things have gone wrong sometimes, to broaden our horizons and explore space. And I really hope they make it back safely.
Yeah, I hope so as well. To leave with, 2 astronauts and come back with 4 is something that supposedly the SpaceX craft has the capacity to do. I guess there's some traffic that goes back and forth on a somewhat regular basis from the International Space Station, so they can hitch a ride with someone else if they don't feel good about this craft. I don't know, it reminds me of what's the fitting a round peg into a square hole thing?
That's the saying.
That came, I don't know if it came from it, but I was at the Space Museum in D.C., and one of the...
You visited our Space Museum
I did.
Recently?
Yes.
With your boyfriend?
Yes.
Okay.
He likes planes and space stuff, and I was a good girlfriend, and I was like, wow, look at all the big planes. But there was one thing that was interesting because there was one of the missions, they had this issue where something broke, and it was like a round pipe valve. I don't understand spaceships. It's rocket science, Robby.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to understand.
Yeah.
But it needed to be attached to a square thing, so it was like they found some way to attach them. I don't know if that's where the phrase came from, but they fixed it, and they got people home, and people back in Houston like walked them through it over like audio, and they're like, okay. So very interesting.
Very interesting stuff.
This seems more complicated than
This
this.
seems more complicated than that. Have you been doing a tour of all of you're getting to various museums under your belt?
I went to the Native American Museum.
Okay.
They didn't have a Haudenosaunee flag, which is where I played lacrosse. This is the people who invented the game of lacrosse, and I was like a little upset that the flag
Who invented it?
wasn't flying. The Haudenosaunee, or like the Iroquois.
Ah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay.
They played it to like settle disputes, which is interesting. It was more violent then. They would like hit each other harder with sticks than we get hit today. But a good way to settle disputes. But no, I've been seeing the museums. The Space Museum, like these astronauts, made me claustrophobic. It's a lot smaller than it looks on the inside. There's a lot of like stuff hanging from the ceiling, like planes hanging from the ceiling, including, Robby, like one of the X-Wings models, not a real one.
From Star Wars.
Star Wars is real, and it was real.
And it will, but it's happened a long time ago in a galaxy far away, but...
Luke Skywalker would have these guys out.
I'm a little behind on Star Wars content right now because I have not watched yet that new show, which I know everybody disliked, but did you watch it?
I've heard that the premise is there are twins, one is good and one is evil. So it's like a lot of other Disney
Star Wars,
movies.
Even a lot of other Star Wars things.
And they like pretend to be each other. It's a very, twin swap movie.
Okay.
That's people have criticism because the actors have been like, oh, but the dark side's so cool. And people are like, that is not the point of the movie.
The dark side's pretty cool, though.
I know. And so like some people are just like unnecessary critical of Star Wars. They could just be like, well, bringing people back from the death is cool, and they said they knew how to do that.
I'm not unnecessarily critical of Star Wars. I actually like a lot of, I like the prequel movies that everybody is always criticizing very, very much. I'm very fond of them. I was fond of the Andor series. It was great. At least some of The Mandalorian was very good. I think the new movies are absolutely
What do you think of
terrible,
Boba Fett? Do you like Boba Fett?
It was not that good.
It was a little slow. I thought Ahsoka was not very good either. It felt too
I like
dramatized.
Ahsoka more. I really like the character Ahsoka, so I really wanted to like it, and I thought it was fine. It was better than Boba Fett. It could have been better.
I'm going to say something controversial yet brave about that.
Stunning.
So Ahsoka, the cuts were very awkward. It was like zoom-ins of facial expressions and then the other person's facial expression, and it created like a weird and unnecessary sexual tension. And
between who?
And I was like, is Ahsoka lesbian? Like Ahsoka and like
between you and Ahsoka.
all of her buddies. No. But like it was weird cuts, and I was like, I'm getting awkward vibes. Like it's a little Love Island right now, the way they're zooming in on people looking at each other. Anyway, it made me feel just weird. I was like, this isn't how Star Wars is shot. But if only we had cameras inside of the space shuttle. I bet they're having interesting conversations in there, Robby.
Maybe the same conversation over and over. Did you watch that Mr. Beast video where he pays two complete strangers to live in like a space together for a while? I don't watch a lot of Mr. Beast content. I did watch that. And then he comes in periodically and like takes the money they're gonna win. They're like, well, you'll win less money, but here's like a TV or something.
Yeah.
I thought it was really great content.
It's very
I thought it was very enjoyable. And they made it through, and they collected some very large amount of money at the end, and they seem to mostly get along. And
yeah, he uses his money for interesting things. He produces interesting media, and he sometimes solves problems with his money. He's like building wells in Africa and things of this nature. I like the parody posts that are like, after Mr. Beast becomes president, and it's like, I bought Japan. Yeah. It's like very funny. I would like to see that. Mr. Beast is too young to run for office, which is surprising to me. He looks old. Apparently,
does look
experimenting with people's lives and paying them to do it drains you.
Can't imagine being drained by the work we do day in and day out. Well, that does it for us on this week for Rising This Week. It's been great being with you, Jessica. We will be back next week because it never ends and every day brings a new joy to our existence, reading, discussing, and debating the news, and we will have more of that very soon.
And if this is even real, you can like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who listen while you're on the go, we are available wherever you get your podcasts.
And do tune in for our Friday show tomorrow, which will be with Amber Duke and
me.
And you?
Yeah.
Is it you?
I think so.
Man, we are working you pretty hard lately.
Yeah, happy to do it.
Thank you. All right. I'll see you next week. Jessica, we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye, y'all.